A few quick words about EC Library. We are the place that connects you to data, information, and knowledge. So if you need anything, you need to check subscriptions to newspapers, books, articles, please use our catalog finder. Here, the links on these slides are actually clickable. You will also find the book that we're going to talk about today. So Digital Democracy, Social Media, and Disinformation is available in our catalog. We also manage the EC data catalog. So if you're dealing a lot with data, please check that out. And we produce something we're quite proud of. This is EC library guides, which are like resources, repositories of relevant research and resources with journals, books, research on different topics. Here we have one on artificial intelligence, new technologies, and democracy. I just want to quickly also say that in EC Library, we have a lot of book talks, but we also organize a lot of training sessions. So please do check out our MyIntracom page. You can find us under Corporate Resources, EC Library. We publish all our events there on our page, or also on the general page of MyIntracom. And here are just a few of the upcoming events. Tomorrow, if there is anybody that is actually new or really wants to see what the library is all about, what kind of services do we offer, we have tomorrow a 2-hour event inside the library, inside the EC library, which is located in VM 18 in Brussels. And this is a course, it's like a welcome course, what the library can do for you for new stuff. But even if you're not so new, you're still welcome and you can still register. We also organize book talks like this one and other ones which are a little bit maybe different topics. We have one next week on loneliness in Europe. And these ones are done in collaboration with DigiDigits, this digital innovation lab. I will let my colleague introduce iLab in a minute. I just want to say the next one for iLab collaboration will be on 16th of October, and it will be in French about algorithms. The author will actually come also in person because he's a professor at the University of Brussels. So that one will be hybrid. It will be in person in the reading room in EC Library and also online like today. Another thing we organize quite a lot is trainings. Our trainings are called Search Like a Pro, and they deal with various things like how to efficiently search on the internet, how to use databases. Also here we have one example, how to manage your references with Zotero. Like I said, these links are clickable. If you're interested, please take a look. And there are a lot more in EU Learn. So this is it from me. So I just want to say also, I'm coordinator of a service called Ask a Librarian. So if you have any question regarding this book talk or anything I have mentioned till now, or what actually the library services are, please use the link. You will also get it in the follow-up email, and it's called Ask a Librarian. You can ask us various questions. We have a big team working on that, and we answer questions as quickly as we can. I leave the floor now to my colleague from iLab, Daphne.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you, amazing. Thank you, Lily, and welcome also on iLab's side to this a date with data session. We are really happy to be partnering with the EC Library to this series of book talks. Just a few words about iLab as well. Basically, we want to boost innovation inside the Commission. This is our mandate and our mission, in particular, the number of proof of concepts and prototypes. To do so, we basically set up a light governance process, and also we organize participatory workshop and offer tools to help colleagues innovate and basically experiment a little bit with technology. For example, we set up a digital innovation dashboard, which shows in a centralized and interactive place all the IT projects and also proof of concept and prototypes which are being developing in the Commission. However, we also want to share knowledge and best practices when it comes to innovation, and so we set up multiple events. You can see on the slides some of those. We have different series. In particular, we have iTalks on government innovation. So next week, for example, we will have an introduction of the Data Innovation Lab by Germany's Foreign Office. And in October, later on, we will have an introduction to the OECD Innovation Playbook and the European Commission Public Sector Tech Watch, which is actually developed by Digit B2, our sister unit, let's say. Then we have iTalks on co-innovation. Those are talks where we invite colleagues actually to present what they're doing, in terms of projects, IT projects, and so on. So also, if you have an innovative initiative and you want to present it to colleagues, feel free to reach out so we can set up a talk. And then we also offer trainings on these light co-innovation governance that I was mentioning. So the next one is in the 1st of October. You are more than welcome if you want to know more about how to use this governance to launch actually your prototype of proof of concept. So I try to keep it short, but for any questions, you can ping me on Teams and I will answer to you as quickly as possible. But yeah, now I will give the floor to Lily again so she can introduce our authors.
Yes, thank you, Daphne. So today the book talk will be called Digital Democracy, Social Media and Disinformation. This book was written by two authors. Unfortunately, one of the authors could not make it today due to circumstances, but I will introduce both of them very shortly. So today with us, we have Nicolas Nicoli, and he's a professor of communication and associate head of the Department of Communications at University of Nicosia in Cyprus. He has conducted studies on organizations such as BBC and TripAdvisor. His work is committed really to fostering a deliberative digital democratic landscape that prioritizes the public interest. He has also contributed to events such as Digital Agenda Cyprus, Green Agenda Cyprus, TEDx, and Young Lions Cyprus. He has also served as a science communicator across various European projects. The co-author that could not make it today is also a professor. He teaches media and communication policy at City St. George's, University of London. He has also participated as a national expert in numerous European projects, together with European Commission, European Parliament, and other European institutions. And out of this, we have reports such as media policy and independent journalism in Greece. He is also advisor to the Greek government on media and communication issues. Together, so they have written this book, Digital Democracy, Social Media and Disinformation. And I will not tell you more about the book because I think the author is here and he will share his slides. And then just a few ground rules. We will be recording. I think the recording has already started. So if any of you don't want to be seen, of course, you can turn off your cameras. But at the end of the presentation, we will have time for Q&A. So for all the questions you might have, you can either raise your hand, you can even turn on the camera if you're not shy, or you can post them in the chat, whatever you want. But like I said, tomorrow I will send a follow-up email with the recording, with these slides, and I will mention also the next book talk we will have. So without further ado, I leave the floor to the author.
Thank you, Lily, and thank you, Daphne, for that introduction. If you just bear with me a moment, I will share my slides. So can someone confirm that you can see the slides?
Yes, they're perfect. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you. So good afternoon, distinguished colleagues and honored guests. My name is Nicolas Nicolai. I am a professor of communications at the University of Nicosia. And it's a true privilege to be here today. And I want to begin by sincerely thanking the European Commission Library and Digital Innovation Lab for inviting me to contribute to this important initiative. Your commitment to dialogue, innovation, and collaboration across borders is what makes discussions like today's both possible and meaningful. The European Commission has long championed democracy, transparency, and shared responsibility. And in our time, these principles face new tests in the digital sphere, where social media has become both a space for democratic expression, but also a breeding ground for disinformation. Today, I hope to reflect on how digital democracy is evolving, how disinformation threatens the trust that underpins it, and what role each of us, as citizens, educators, policymakers, and innovators, can play in safeguarding truth and dialogue in the online world. So my co-author, Professor Petros Yosifidis, as Lily said, unfortunately cannot be with us here today. He had a last-minute serious issue. I will do my best, though, to cover in his absence. As you can see, we are both professors of communications and media policy, and it is within this prism that we have sought to address the issues at hand, digital democracy, social media, and of course, disinformation. I have broken the presentation down into 4 different parts. As you can see here, the thesis of the book. Then I will look a little bit closer at digital environments, say a few words about digital theory, and close with saying a few words also about disinformation. So the book was published in 2021 by Routledge, and much of it was written during COVID-19 lockdown in 2020. And at the time, the pandemic forced us to confront how deeply digital technologies had become woven into our lives, not just as tools of communication, but as the primary infrastructure of our public sphere. 5 years on, the premise of the book has not only held true and has become more urgent as the challenges of digital democracy and disinformation have only intensified. The book is divided into 3 sections. The first lays out the theoretical framework, asking whether the public sphere, albeit a normative construct, can meaningfully unfold in the digital landscape. Can social media platforms, with all their affordances and flaws, nurture democratic deliberation, or do their very architectures undermine it? The second section turns to the state of the art of disinformation, examining its evolution from early concerns about fake news into the more complex, networked, and weaponized forms we see today. This leads into 2 country case studies, Ukraine and Russia. When this was first written, Russia's disinformation ecosystem was already notorious, weaponizing narratives domestically and internationally. Ukraine, meanwhile, stood on the forefront of these information wars. Since then, of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 has underscored how disinformation and hybrid warfare are inseparable. Information operations have become as strategically important as military campaigns, shaping global narratives, influencing public opinion, and even attempting to fracture alliances. The Ukrainian experience, particularly its innovative and often grassroots-driven responses, highlights not only the dangers of disinformation, but also the resilience and creativity of democratic actors under siege. The concluding section of the book does not claim to offer neat or prescriptive solutions. And you might ask why, and the reason is because of the complexity of the problem and how the complexity resists them. Instead, the book advocates for imagining a different kind of digital landscape, one that prioritizes transparency, accountability, and human agency over extraction and manipulation. The book also touches on the rise of artificial intelligence, and at the time, OpenAI's ChatGPT-1 was a curiosity, an early experiment in large-scale language modeling. Today, with GPT-5 and beyond, the transformative potential of AI is undeniable. Yet, as with social media before it, we must ask whether bridging the innovation gap is enough if we fail to ground that innovation in policy, ethics, and democratic oversight. The question remains, is technological progress meaningful if it outpaces our ability to share it for the public good? When we talk about digital democracy, we mean the use of digital technologies to strengthen democratic life. This can be as simple as online petitions or consultations, but also as powerful as grassroots movements that start on a phone screen and end up shaping national debates. Digital tools can open doors to participation, but they can also close them if we don't address issues of access, inequality, and power. Social media is where people gather to share, connect, and build communities. At first glance, it looks like the perfect public sphere. a space where everyone can speak, where voices can be amplified without the filter of traditional gatekeepers. It all sounded very promising, a kind of digital town square, but we now know that the same features that connect us can also divide us, creating echo chambers and amplifying harmful content. Which brings us, of course, to disinformation. That's information that is false and spread with intent to deceive. Unlike simple mistakes or rumors, disinformation is calculated. It plays on emotions, spreads fast, and undermines trust. We see how it can fracture societies, weaken democracy, and even become a weapon in times of conflict. So the theoretical framework of the book, really, as I had mentioned earlier, is through the lens of Habermas's public sphere, which in its classic sense is the space where citizens come together to discuss common concerns, to deliberate, and to hold those in power accountable. It is not a physical place, but a democratic ideal, the idea that public opinion can be formed through open and reasoned debate. Today, scholars suggest that this idea needs updating. Some talk about the networked public sphere, where online platforms create new arenas for participation and debate. Others point to the crisis of the public sphere, arguing that fragmentation, polarization, and disinformation have weakened its foundations. Still, others highlight the rise of counter-publics, alternative communities, and voices that challenge dominant narratives, often enabled by the very same digital tools. Which brings us, of course, to the key tension. Does digital communication strengthen democracy by enabling more voices, or weaken it by eroding shared truths and rational debate? And it's on this that we begin our journey in this book by looking at two sides of the same coin. We have two sets of people, really, two polarized sets of people. On the one hand, we have the techno-optimist, the technophile. And on the other, we have the techno-pessimist. And, both of them consume content within the same digital environment. And I'll say more about this as we proceed. But looking at digital environments, I think it's important to dissect it and break it down more. COVID didn't create the dynamics we're discussing today, but it certainly accelerated them. A trend that was already emerging suddenly unfolded at warp speed. And MIT scholar Sinana Rao, who has studied the spread of information online for years, analyzed the data during this period. And here are some of the statistics. Only during 2020, we saw huge increases in this accelerated space. 30% increase for YouTube, 50% for Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp 50, Facebook Live 50, Netflix, of course, 66. And unsurprisingly, group calls grew by 1,000% during the lockdown period. However, it's also his other findings that were extremely important. False information spreads faster, farther, and deeper than truth. And of course, again, it's unsurprising because false information is usually more engaging. On Twitter, for instance, false news stories were 70% more likely to be retweeted than true ones. Importantly, this wasn't only because of bots or algorithms, it was largely human behavior. People, often unintentionally, acted as amplifiers. The pandemic magnified this dynamic. Misinformation about health, vaccines, and conspiracy theories didn't just live online, they spilled into the real world, shaping behaviors and shaping policies, of course. I think this is kind of interesting as well, just extending on this. Mark Zuckerberg in 2020 made this comment, we're just trying to keep the lights on over here. And the acceleration of digital life is seen in this quote. When he said this, billions of people suddenly glued to screens and servers were working overtime. So maybe in one sense, it's not surprising, but still, it's hard not to picture the Facebook headquarters with Zuck anxiously checking the electric meter, even though the company is worth hundreds of billions, just keeping the lights on indeed. Which brings us, of course, to exactly how big these companies are when we are trying to understand the digital environment. This slide you see here is the top 10 largest companies in the world in terms of market capitalization. And arguably, with the exception maybe of Saudi Aramco, all of them at their core deal with digital one way or another, whether it's hardware, software, or semiconductors. Even Tesla, one would argue that at its core, it's a digital company, and increasingly so with self-driving cars. We see here, for example, Amazon. It has 50% share of all US e-commerce, and that's more than the next 10 organizations put together. And Apple in 2024 had 391 billion in revenues. And when we compare that with another American well-known brand like Nike, which had only 51 billion revenues, you understand the extent. Meta, of course, has now over 3.6 billion active users. And again, I mean, compare that, that's more than double Christianity. And Alphabet, Google's parent company, just about everyone who works there now are millionaires. And again, when you compare that with a legacy media group, again from the US, like the New York Times, attractive salaries, yes, but nothing close to Alphabet's. When you combine the market cap of these companies, 10 years ago, 1.7 trillion, 5 years ago, 6 trillion, and just last year and this year, close to 10 trillion. And we have to keep in mind that with the kind of market tipping that they have available to them, there is a lot of brain drain occurring, not least of which comes from European companies. So just to put again this in context here, and I know any economist in the audience here will strangle me for doing this, but you know, you can't really compare market cap with nominal GDP, but money is money. And when you look here, for example, at Cyprus, with a nominal GDP of just under 30 billion, there was a running joke a few years ago that Jeff Bezos is interested in buying Cyprus. And when you see these figures here, it's not surprising. And what of the adoption of these technologies? You know, the diffusion really in how they have reached 100 million users is quite incredible, especially when you look at the most recent AI companies here like ChatGPT. In just 2 months, it had reached 100 million users. In other words, platforms are not just apps anymore. They're turned into whole ecosystems that shape how we shop, how we talk, and how we live online. And digital platforms have evolved into marketplaces where users, producers, and advertisers interact. And platformization scholars, those who look at how the internet is now funneled through these digital platforms, argue that we can break down these organizations, these entities, into 3 different areas. They have evolved, of course, into marketplaces where users, producers, and advertisers interact with huge multi-sided network effects, with consumer lock-ins, and different kinds of very ominous, I would argue, market tipping characteristics. And of course, their infrastructure, they operate on large-scale infrastructures, private networks that are built, by the way, on public networks that shape communication, commerce, and culture. And of course, these are companies that exercise their own governance. They set up their own rules, they self-regulate, they moderate content, and they control access. And while one would argue that that might not be necessarily a bad thing to self-regulate, when you do see that their ultimate goal is engagement, because engagement keeps people on for longer, what I see there is quite an obvious and tacit market failure, because engagement doesn't always necessarily mean content which is truthful. So, you know, this makes them powerful actors in shaping both markets and society, culture, and public life, of course. And who are the people that use these platforms? Well, we all are. We are all networked citizens, consumers who actively participate, share, and engage in society through digital networks and online platforms. We use digital tools to access information, to connect with others, to collaborate and influence social, political, and cultural discussions. And let's not, of course, forget children who are also networked citizens growing up in this digital landscape where online interactions, information sharing, and social connections are integral to their learning, to how they play, to how their identities are formed. This environment shapes how they communicate, understand the world, and participate in society from an early age. And here, this slide illustrates the individual impacts of constant connectivity. And on an individual level, we must be aware of an always-on mentality with which these smart devices are designed to do. With issues such as addiction and bullying and the fear of missing out, of loose relationships, of issues of self-esteem, one needs to only look at the psychological profile of the shooter of Charlie Kirk, and you can understand why we are talking about these things, of course, or TV series like Adolescence, where these have huge impact, and we see them played out in cultural consumption. And of course, these are technologies that trigger the visual cortex more than longer form, the written word. So, it's a lot more engaging if something is visual, if it's a video, if it's an image, than if it's the written word. And what does this have to say about our own cognitive health? Issues of apathy and fear also are part of this, and I'll say a few more about this later on. And as I close with looking at the digital environment, it's interesting to see here, since also, this is a discussion within the framework of data. Eric Schmidt in 2011, a while ago now, at the time he was CEO of Google, he said every 2 days, we create as much data as we did from the dawn of civilization up until 2003. That's something like 5 exabytes of data. Now, since then, you can see here that data has only, exponentially increased as we enter the precipice of an AI age, where data is only, projected to increase much more. So moving on with digital theory, with democratic theory, the key concept here is that digital democracy can and has reshaped participation and governance. And the public sphere is where political discourse and rational critical debate is now seen happening on online spaces. Digital technologies have the potential to offer, and they do offer, new tools and models of democracy, such as open deliberative democracy, global reach, real-time mobilization, and transparency. However, there is evidence that does show, recent evidence, that internet freedom has fallen for 14 consecutive years. Governments are more often restricting social media. They're blocking sites, they're blocking media. In the US just today, Jimmy Kimmel, a talk show host you might have heard, was fired for comments that he made, and he was pressured to leave following regulatory pressure from the FCC. So, these things are ongoing. Lots of online interventions and censorship and content manipulation outside of a framework of any policy kind of approach. And here is another example from my country. Some of you might recognize him, most of you won't. This is the president of the Republic of Cyprus. His name is Nikos Christodoulidis, the president here. This went viral on Facebook initially and on other platforms about a month ago in Cyprus, where this lady, the mother of an alt-right figure, apparently jumped him and kissed him. And of course, The two most surprising people when this started to go viral were these two people, because this didn't actually happen. However, even after this image was debunked, it seems that from my initial research that there has been a continued effect. And this is something, again, that I'll explain a bit about when I look closer at debunking. In democratic theory, several dilemmas arise. The democratic dilemma highlights the tension between participation and inequalities in access or influence. The tolerance dilemma shows the risk that unlimited tolerance can empower groups that threaten democracy. So democracy's power is its tolerance, but at the same time, when too much is tolerated, what does that mean about the existence of democracy itself? And the freedom of expression dilemma reflects the challenge of balancing open speech with protecting society from harm. Together, they illustrate the complex trade-offs democracies face in fostering inclusion, debate, and safety. And again, you might ask why I'm showing this slide. And the reason I mention it is because the biggest arena to practice all of this now is not in the streets, but it's online, on what we call now the online marketplace of ideas. So again, something I'm sure you're all aware of, but democratic backsliding has been now a reality for a few years. Since the Berlin Wall until around 2005, in a more unilateral world, we did see the growth of liberal democracies. However, since then, we can see the rise of a lot of authoritarian regimes and the overall backsliding of many democracies around the world. And how did we get here? This is something that we try and tackle in the book. And although it's not an exhaustive list, here are some of the reasons, of course, as to why these things are happening. A functioning democracy relies on a well-informed citizenry. A post-truth era means we trust information less. And it's true that now there is a lot more overall cynicism of what was once very important, of 20th century societal structures, such as legacy media and even governments. Of course, higher inequality and economic downturns are squeezing the middle class, and there are a lot of disassociations and a decrease in social capital. And something which is somewhat under-researched is what we call the principle of veracity. And this is a term that was phrased by the Swedish philosopher Sissela Bock, who argued that it's human innate nature to be more truthful than it is to lie. We have more of an easier ability to say the truth, and that's somewhat like a tacit social contract. However, the longer we lead our lives and the more hours we spend online, the more we see that this is not the case, and that in fact the principle of veracity is under threat. And finally, moving on to disinformation. I'm assuming a lot of you will be aware of the term, so I'll just quickly go over these next slides. Digital disinformation is verifiably false or misleading information created, presented, and disseminated for economic gain or to intentionally deceive the public and may cause public harm. Public harm comprises threats to democratic, political, and policy-making processes, as well as public goods, such as the protection of EU citizens' health, the environment, or security. Now, disinformation has been around for many, many years, and there have been many, many cases, usually under the literature on propaganda, of how disinformation, we have seen spies from other countries, for example, who worked either as politicians or as journalists, for example. But digital disinformation works on a different scale. It's quite unprecedented due to its speed and precision of targeting, creating personalized information spheres and becoming powerful echo chambers. Under the umbrella of disinformation, of course, we have misinformation, which is the spread of false information, but it's sent without harmful intent. And there's more misinformation than disinformation, of course, because people don't know that they're actually sending this kind of content out there. And then there is fake news, which is disinformation that mimics news media content. And the next obvious question would be, how does this content spread? And it's usually either through foreign interference agents, things like troll farms and keyboard armies, hyper-partisan citizens from any country itself. It doesn't have to be external, it doesn't have to be hybrid warfare. From profiteers who are just doing it because they can, and maybe they can make some money from this, or, as is often the case, a combination of the above. And how does it spread, you might ask? Well, it spreads obviously through fake news sites and social media, on what we call computational propaganda, which is various kinds of bots and social bots and chat bots. And there are numerous kinds. There's the dormant kind, there's the listener bot that becomes activated after maybe it sees some kind of content or in the comments section of Instagram, say, or somewhere. Sleeper bots, troll bots, or honeypot bots, which is an automated program designed to attract, detect, and study malicious activity online. You also see disinformation spreading through in-groups. That's very common as well, through different small communities. What these bad actors do is they try and identify cracks in society, areas where people are already polarized, and that's where they kind of send subtly, oftentimes, as is the case, their disinformation content. And it spreads also because of low verification practices. So there's a lot more attention now given to verification practices. And let's not forget that disinformation is designed to be engaging and therefore amplified algorithmically. So, anything that will make someone share it a lot more, and which of course is the reason why disinformation travels faster and broader than true news as it is. And what is the impact of digital disinformation? Well, it's fair to say we are living through the impact of digital disinformation, but I'll just again go over a non-exhaustive list. Moral panics, very common. Obfuscation and paralysis, so a lot of confusion and people not knowing what to do, creating oftentimes apathy, and a lot of it due to information overload of contrasting data. Fear and cynicism, of course, increased levels of not only ideological polarization, but affective polarization. And for those of you that don't know, this is the kind that the person who is on the other side hates the other person. So it really is of the bad kind. And it's fair to say that disinformation can really fuel and accelerate affective polarization. Apathy, as we discussed, distrust, of course, increased levels of cognitive biases, such as confirmation bias, as we have discussed through these echo chambers, and hindsight bias and recency bias, and even the bias of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where, for those who don't know it, it's the kind of bias where the more you know, the less, the more you know, the more doubts you have about something, and the less you know, the more you feel that you know about something. So you see a lot of this playing out on different social media platforms. And as I come to an end, how to fight back. In the book, we discuss two different approaches. There is detection, of course, where we deal with verification, and verification has to do with trying to spot and identify fake news or disinformation before it's out there. So you're trying to avoid it. It really is an avoidance mechanism. A lot of news media, of course, practice this. Then there is fact check-in, which occurs after the information is out there. So you're looking to check the facts, whether it's true or not. And if it's not true, then disinformation is occurring, and you have to move into this next level of debunking, right? So once you debunk something, you have to go out there and say, listen, this isn't true. However, even when this is the case, a lot of social psychologists argue that there is something called the continued influence effect, where people, even if you tell them that something is not true, like the case with the president and the alt-right mother, it still has a continued effect. Or worse still, what's called the worldview backfire effect, where if you debunk a story, someone is so ingrained in their own ideology that it becomes even worse, that they just cement themselves in their own ideology and become even more partisan against you. Of course, other detection mechanisms are news literacy and media literacy. And then there's response, which is different kinds of strategic communications, such as what we're doing now, this presentation, and different kinds of others as well, public interest communication, media literacy courses. I think this is very important, and we should be supporting this more. Support of news media and traditional news gatekeepers, so that people can organically consume news, not from social media platforms, but from the news sites, but from the news publishers themselves. And there are quite a lot of emerging technologies that can help with this, such as, for example, immersive journalism and immersive storytelling, or the blockchain and different kinds of machine learning that work to the benefit of the news organization. So our central premise in the book is that the overall digital environment needs an overhaul, and we need to persuade the world that this is actually the case. And as I come to a close, I just want to again bring up this slide. We have to look at these technologies as being very important, as being tools that we can use. However, because they can be affected by external structures, we need to be techno-realists and understand this and to create policy within this framework. And on this final slide, I just want to quote from the book this content here, which the current state of affairs from around the world begs the question, can the internet's potential for creating a digital democracy truly be realized? Or is it facilitating global societal rifts? In order to meet the internet's potential for the setting up of an electronic agora, we may require a re-evaluation of its catalysts of digital democracy. Re-evaluation of its current setup. Social media in particular, such promising catalysts of digital democracy, need to be thought through again, as self-regulating models are failing, therefore inciting a complete platform regulation overhaul. Digital democracy, social media, and disinformation is an attempt to contribute to these issues. And the European Union, often criticized for its approach to regulating innovation, even by stakeholders within its own member states, the challenge here is twofold. The Union needs to stay the course with its regulatory ethos, while also continuing to foster innovation and remain competitive with other global regions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was very, very interesting. I found it very interesting. So thank you so much.
I hope I was on time.
Yeah, no problem. Very good timing. I just want to, before I pass the floor to my colleagues, if they have any questions, I would just like to ask you, because with this slide you had pessimist, optimist, realist, where do you see yourself there?
Well, interestingly, I started out, as I think many people did, as an optimist. And that reached, a high point with the Arab Springs, of course, and where we could actually see a lot of this play out in real time. And even in Ukraine with the Orange Revolution, we saw how you could put this in practice, how you could mobilize people. However, in the current digital landscape, I've become more of a pessimist, which is, why I think it's on all of us to try and change this landscape.
Yes, absolutely. I actually share your opinion. I think all of us I still remember those fresh days of, beginnings of social media, what enthusiasm this was, it felt so good. And now it has become, such a bad place.
Because unfortunately, we're kind of living through it, right? I mean,
Yes.
we're kind of witnessing the repercussions day by day.
Exactly. And especially those of us who have children, I think we are very worried as well. Where is this going? I mean, we are repeating ourselves with other parents, but I think it's a legitimate question. Yes. So I invite colleagues now. If you have any questions, please just don't be shy. Turn on your cameras, or even without the cameras, you can just go ahead. So I think Desislava was the first one.
Good afternoon, colleagues and Professor. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation of a very interesting book. I'll certainly buy it. I have two questions, if I may. So the first is the inherent contradiction in the term digital democracy. Why? Because one can argue that the people who own the platforms, they're all very rich men. And we know that you showed that. I mean, Bezos and any other of the tech bros can try and buy many countries, not only Cyprus. And we know that historically democracy was the invention and the domain, so to speak, of middle classes. And we see another very important phenomenon at the moment, which allegedly will be also accelerated by the artificial intelligence, the demise of the legal middle classes. I mean, this is a trend that has started already last century, and middle classes are being squeezed, and AI might even eliminate them, some tech bros claim. So with the demise of the middle classes, would that mean also that democracy will die? Because usually working class people have no time and no means to influence, to play a big role in influencing public and political life, while the rich people simply would like to get rid of democracy. So that's the first question. How do you see this interplay between digital, between the platforms accelerating and technology accelerating the end of the middle classes? Would democracy survive? Does it have a chance? Is the first question. And the second question is about your last slide on what do we do about this information. And yes, you said we debunk it, we respond. And having worked in 2 delegations in Africa, I find it very frustrating to come with, we have the EU versus disinfo website, where we very methodically, scientifically, rigorously debunk myths spread by Russian and Chinese disinformation. The problem is this is a totally asymmetrical fight, because as you pointed, they have armies of trolls, of bots. It's industrially produced disinformation and interference, including by political projects in some of our member states, by ownership of traditional and social media. And we are very shyly, coyly debunking and saying, go and read, we debunk this myth, but nobody really engages, because debunking, as you said, is not as engaging as inciting fear, polarization, pointing fingers to the enemy. So isn't it time for the EU to change strategy altogether and become very proactive and aggressive in this space in the name of democracy? And how would you think we can do that?
Okay, thank you for those questions. The first question in particular is a very, good question, a very hard question, and I think unfortunately it's not been addressed as much as it should, because it seems to me that everyone is really concentrating and discussing that the whole discourse of AI is on the affordances of the technology itself. And we're not really looking at the impact that it will have. So, everyone is just really amazed about this new technology, but there is not much discussion about what the next day will bring. And as you say, if there is so much automation, if there is so much going on, that we will witness the demise of the middle class, then the only thing happening that can avoid this is a social contract. So, we will have to come together as governments, as regions, and discuss how we can sustain democracy in this new framework. So while the middle class won't exist in terms of class structures, I think it's important that social contracts are created in this new automated environment. And again, I feel like this isn't being discussed enough. Everyone is just overawed by the technology, and no one is talking about the impact. Not no one, but very little is being discussed about the impact and exactly what would it mean in a post-labor world. I mean, what does it literally mean for us to have everything automated? So, the only answer I see is social contracts between nations. Regarding your second point, what will we do as a European Union? I think it's important that we continue to debunk it. You cannot avoid debunking. I mean, you have to debunk a story when it's out there. And of course, there have been now a lot of studies as to how to debunk. I think it's important that we train ourselves into the proper way of debunking. And social science has a lot to tell us about exactly how we should go about doing that in order to avoid this continued effect of debunking. However, for me, the better solution as we continue to do this is to really, well, it's twofold. On the one hand, we need to continue media literacy and critical thinking, of course. It sounds cliche, but it's not done enough on all levels of society. And we need to continue doing that in order to understand, the information that comes to us. And the second thing we need to do is we need to support journalism and news media more so that people can organically go to these places and consume a lot of information from there and know the difference between, content creation and journalism. Because, once that's done, then you can kind of create this silo in your head and understand and protect yourself more. And I think this is quite important. And the best way of doing so, I think, is to try and support journalism more. That's all I can say really about that.
Thank you. Raffaele, are you still with us? You have your question ready?
Yes. Thanks a lot, Professor, for insightful presentation. I wanted to go back to your really last slide about regulation. Precisely about a bit EU regulation, because the EU was at some point, my impression was really one of the first, let's say, regulator try to address the issue of privacy of social media, of content online. And of course, I guess it was very hard to regulate that because we are confronted with something very new. So the risk of over-regulation or, well, bad regulation was clearly there, but at the same time, it was the first one, and it was considered something very positive. And now there is, you can see, I guess, all around the backlash against this regulation, and especially these are accused to just hamper innovation. That I think it's really not the case. There are other factors that are hampering innovation in EU in digital technology. But okay, so what is your assessment of the EU regulation, so the attempt that has been done, and how you see a bit more this tension between innovation and regulation, especially when the EU is regulating something it doesn't own so much, because a lot of media companies are not EU companies. So this also create tension. I heard somewhere that in order to really regulate, for instance, AI, you should have your own AI. Otherwise, it's quite impossible to regulate it.
Yeah. The DSA and the DMA are great attempts, in my opinion, because what they try to do is to regulate before something is out there. So, they're looking at a regulation. This is the big change. They're trying to regulate something before it's out there. But one of the interesting currencies of regulation is, which is not seen that much in current regulation, is attention. We need to find ways to include our attention in competition policy, for example. It's not only about the economy, it's also about attention economy. And there are quite a lot of scholars and legal scholars working out of Columbia University, for example, in New York. Tim Wu would be one of them, who is really trying to focus regulation on looking at attention as a currency. And when we move the goalposts this way, I think it's going to be a lot better for us as a region to explain, that this regulation is necessary, that there are indeed market failures here, and that the regulation needs to happen. That's one thing, though. But the other, the main problem that I see actually is that these companies are so big and so powerful that it's difficult to regulate them, even if it's regulation beforehand. There's the ex ante and all that stuff. But they have become so powerful that in a way they're almost ignoring the regulation and the action itself. It's very important that we continue to deliberate on why and how we regulate, but maybe we need to move the goalposts a bit and to see actually what we're regulating. What's the currency we're looking at? We're regulating information. Information is about time and attention. So maybe that is what we should be looking at more, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much. I don't see any hands raised, and I must say it is 5 o'clock. We have said this will be a 1-hour book talk. So what I suggest now that we stop here now. Thank you, Alba. You can stop recording. And I invite the colleagues, when I will send the email out tomorrow,